It seems like every other game these days has to include either the word dungeon or heart. So naturally, including both words in your title is a great way to make it stand out. Right? It's almost as bad as the of war epidemic a few years ago, but I digress. Regardless of how I feel about the unfortunate name choice, Dungeon Hearts is actually a fairly well-crafted romp through the Match 3 gameplay formula. But is the premise interesting enough to survive the gamut of our exceptionally high standards? You'll just have to watch and see in this Armless Octopus video review of Dungeon Hearts. The first thing many gamers are likely to think when they see Dungeon Hearts is, oh god, not another Match 3 game. While I'm usually right there with you, Dungeon Hearts is different enough that it warrants a closer look and shouldn't be immediately dismissed. Nope, this is actually a puzzle-type game that easily appeals to the core gamer, so you can go ahead and put those particular concerns at ease. This is a game that even the most jaded hardcore player can enjoy, even though its iOS roots are sometimes fairly noticeable. But more on that later. In Dungeon Hearts, you'll match 3 types of blocks called chargers together to create gems called strikers. These gems serve as your main means of damaging enemies as well as dispelling their attacks and harmful runes. Your attacks come from one of 4 friendly heroes on the left side of the screen. You'll match the chargers and activate strikers as they move from left to right in the quote fate stream to dispatch your opponent before they manage to reach your front line with their special damaging blocks. Alright, so the game sounds a tad complicated at first, but once you spend a few minutes playing it, you'll have the core mechanics down in no time. Perhaps the best way to explain the gameplay of Dungeon Hearts is to say it's sort of a mashup between Bejeweled and Final Fantasy that DS Final Fantasy game with the music and the dudes. Alright, let's go ahead and get right into what's great about this game. First off, it's fairly addictive and easy to find yourself playing for far longer than you originally anticipated. It's just far too easy to say, just one more game, and then be entranced for the following hour. The art style is also something to admire, as it's a fairly stylized aesthetic that features very clean-looking character models and interface. Just try not to look too closely at the scrolling background if you're prone to motion sickness. It has this odd kind of fisheye lens effect on the edges that might trigger some nausea in some more sensitive viewers. Now, one would think such a simple gameplay premise would get rather old very quickly, but there is enough icing on this particular cake to keep it interesting far longer than your traditional Match 3 puzzle game. Dungeon Hearts features RPG mainstays like buffs, debuffs, special attacks, enemy runes, and a plethora of other special variables that keep the gameplay fresh and engaging. And for those of you who are concerned about such a casual-looking game not offering much of a challenge, think again. Maybe I'm just not very good at this type of game, but I found the later stages to be more than enough to make me rethink my puzzle game prowess. In fact, the difficulty is one of the things that I find most vexing. On one hand, I enjoy a challenge, but on the other hand, the difficulty curve seems so extreme in places that it's often frustrating. It's rather maddening to be playing a single game for over 30 minutes with a steady challenge, only to be waylaid by an enemy who simply refuses to die, or the game floods the screen with unusable blocks. Either way, the game's ability to conjure feelings of impotence is one of its biggest downfalls. Well, I guess that note means that we've arrived at the less than impressive aspects of Dungeon Hearts, so without further ado, here's the stuff that I liked a little bit less. First off, and I think I mentioned this before, terrible name. It's just so incredibly generic, but it's one of the more forgivable offenses the game is charged with, so I'll gladly look past it. Another minor complaint is that there doesn't appear to be any way to clear your save data. While this doesn't sound like a big deal, I actually missed the opening cutscene for the story mode, and it seems like the only way to be able to view it again is to uninstall the game and install it again. Seems kinda silly to me. Like I mentioned before, Dungeon Hearts originally hails from iOS land, and it definitely shows. For instance, it would have been nice for the PC port to map the activate function to the right mouse button rather than the same button as the move function. It seems like a minor gripe, but this small decision to have both functions on the same button will sometimes result in you accidentally dragging something when you actually wanted to activate it. And in this game, correct placement means everything. Some other gripes are that other than unlocking new soundtracks, there doesn't really seem to be much in the way of overall game progression. While the self-contained play sessions are still enjoyable, it would have been nice to feel like every time that you play that you are working towards something greater. A larger goal to shoot for other than just opening new music tracks. Veering away from complaints for the moment, the OST is actually of really high quality and reminiscent of old Final Fantasy scores. Now, I'm not saying that they're anywhere near as good as the classic Nobuo Uematsu scores, but I'm just saying that they're fun, catchy, and set the tone of the game perfectly. Alright, back to the bitching now. I mentioned earlier how frustrating the game's difficulty can be. This is compounded by a few things that, when by themselves seem harmless enough, when together add up to a level of frustration that can easily cause your eye to start stress twitching. First off, the very nature of the moving blocks can sometimes make it difficult to grab the block that you want. When you want to quickly click and drag a block, if you attempt to grab right on the edge of the block, the game will sometimes think you're trying to grab the block next to it instead, leading to you moving the wrong block. To be honest, I'm not sure how the developers would fix something like this since it's a fundamental of the game, but it can still be frustrating regardless, so it bears mentioning. Another harp is that the enemies don't display any kind of health bar. Sure, their blocks appear cracked and damaged when they're near death, but after fighting one monster for over 5 minutes and not seeing that effect kick in, it can be rather depressing to not know if you're actually making much in the way of progress. Alright, the last complaint, like most of them, is a fairly minor one. When using skills, the game requires you to click on some fairly small buttons to activate the power. It seems like the developer could have increased the size of these buttons slightly for the PC port, since trying to keep your cursor over these tiny little buttons while also trying to keep your eye on the action can be fairly difficult. Now, after that seemingly needless long tirade of complaints, it may seem like we didn't really like Dungeon Hearts. That's not necessarily true. The game is fun, the premise is unique, the audio is spot on, and it's an addicting good time. While there are a few blemishes, the overall package is still quite the beauty and is definitely worth the $3 price tag. Here's hoping they can patch in some more content or fix the minor annoyances, but as it stands now, Dungeon Hearts gets a 4 out of 5.